The first time Lena's mother said those words, I almost dropped the entire tray of wine glasses. She didn't say it loudly, quite the opposite. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, right in the middle of that elegant family engagement party where everyone was pretending this was just a casual celebration instead of a carefully orchestrated announcement. Elaine Whitmore looked at me, smiled like she had just uncovered a secret the entire room had missed, and said, "So you're the reason my daughter hasn't been dating anyone, huh?" I turned to look at Lena. She was standing next to the man her family had chosen for her, Grant Holloway. 33, successful, from the right kind of family, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit and the kind of watch that cost more than my truck. On paper, he was flawless. But when her eyes found mine across the room for half a second, I finally understood something I had spent 6 years refusing to see. She hadn't been waiting for someone perfect. She had been waiting for me. My name is Caleb Morgan. I'm 27, and I make furniture for a living. Not the kind you buy in big box stores with particle board and fake wood grain. Real furniture. Solid oak, walnut, cherry. The kind that gets passed down from one generation to the next because it was built to last. I work in a small workshop just outside Nashville, in a quiet suburb where the smell of cut wood mixes with the scent of fresh cut grass on summer afternoons. It's not glamorous. My hands are always rough. My clothes always carry the faint smell of sawdust, and I've got calluses in places most people don't even know exist. But I love it. There's something honest about turning a rough slab of timber into something beautiful and useful. Something that will still be standing long after I'm gone. I don't talk much. Never have. People say I'm the strong, silent type, but the truth is, I just prefer doing over-explaining. Words have a way of complicating things that don't need to be complicated. That's probably why Lena and I got along so well from the very beginning. Lena Whitmore. Same age as me. Sharp, quick-witted, the kind of woman who could walk into a chaotic room and have everything organized in under 10 minutes, just by saying the right things in the right order. She works as an event coordinator for one of the big hotels downtown. We met 7 years ago at a charity fundraiser. I was 20, hired to build a small wooden stage for the evening. Lena was a volunteer in charge of guest relations. She walked up to me while I was still hammering the last few boards into place, looked at my work for about 3 seconds and said, "That backdrop is beautiful. But if you hang the flowers like that, it's going to look like a wedding between two people who hate each other." I stopped hammering and looked at her. She was wearing a simple black dress, hair pulled back, and had this calm, slightly amused expression like she wasn't the least bit worried about insulting a complete stranger. "You've known me for 3 minutes and you're already criticizing my work?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "I call it artistic feedback. I call it a personal attack." She laughed. A real laugh, not the polite kind. And just like that, Lena Whitmore stepped into my life without asking permission and never really left. Over the next 7 years, she became the person I called first when something good happened. The person I wanted to see when a day had gone completely sideways. She knew I liked my coffee black, but always let it go cold because I got distracted. She knew I went quiet when I was thinking too hard. She knew I hated big crowds, but would still show up if she asked. And I knew she hated white roses because they looked like fake apologies. I knew she preferred lemon cake over chocolate. I knew that when she laughed too loud, it usually meant she was hiding something. A lot of people asked if we were dating. Every single time, I gave the same answer. No, we're just best friends. Lena would always smile when I said that. But sometimes the smile came a half-second late. I noticed. I just pretended I didn't. Because admitting anything else felt dangerous. Like if I said the words out loud, I might lose the most important person in my life. Her family was the kind that cared a lot about appearances. Her father, Victor Whitmore, ran a medical equipment distribution company. Strict, practical, the type who treated every life decision like a business investment that needed to be calculated carefully. Her mother, Elaine, was different. Softer on the surface, but she had this way of looking at you like she already knew every secret you were trying to keep. She was always kind to me, but those eyes made me feel like I'd never successfully lied to her in my entire life. It was a Wednesday night when Lena called. I was in the workshop sanding the top of a dining table I'd been working on for weeks. The phone was wedged between my shoulder and ear, sawdust still clinging to my forearms. "Caleb, are you free this Saturday?" she asked. Her voice was too normal. The kind of normal that usually meant something was wrong. "Yeah, why?" She hesitated, just for a second. "My family is having a thing." "What kind of thing?" Another pause. "Just a family gathering." I put the sandpaper down. "Lena, what kind of thing?" She sighed, and I could almost see her rubbing her forehead the way she always did when she was stressed. "They want to introduce me to someone." I went still. "A guy?" "Yeah." "Like a date?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "More like a serious introduction." I understood immediately. Her family was setting her up. And not just for a casual date. This was the kind of introduction that came with expectations, the kind that ended with wedding planning and family mergers. "His name is Grant Holloway," she said quietly. 33, son of one of Dad's biggest business partners, successful, polite, has his own company, everything my father thinks is appropriate. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just stood there in the middle of my workshop, surrounded by half-finished furniture and the smell of fresh wood, feeling like the floor had shifted under my feet. "Are you going to go?" I finally asked. "I don't really have a choice. Dad already set it up." I closed my eyes. "Do you want me there?" Lena was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said very softly, "Yeah, I do. I didn't ask if she wanted this marriage. I didn't ask if she was happy. I didn't ask the one question that had been sitting in my chest for 7 years. Because I was afraid of the answer, and I was even more afraid that I didn't have the right to ask it. "I'll be there," I said. "Thank you, Caleb." After we hung up, I stood in the workshop for a long time, staring at the half-finished table in front of me. My hands were still covered in sawdust. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. For 7 years, I had called Lena my best friend. I had convinced myself that was enough, that wanting more would ruin everything, that staying silent was the safest way to keep her in my life. But standing there in the quiet workshop with her voice still echoing in my head, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Fear. Not the fear of losing a friend. The fear that I might already be losing something I had never been brave enough to name. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending. The party was held in the backyard of the Whitmore house. String lights hung between the trees, casting a soft golden glow over everything. Long tables covered in white tablecloth stretched across the lawn. Flowers sat in simple glass vases. Everything looked elegant, expensive, and completely out of place for what was supposed to be a casual family gathering. I knew the moment I stepped through the gate that this wasn't just dinner. This was a quiet announcement. Everyone seemed to understand that except Lena. I wore a dark blue button-down shirt, clean jeans, and the only pair of decent shoes I owned. Still standing among men in tailored suits and women wearing jewelry that probably cost more than my truck, I felt like I had accidentally walked into the wrong event, like someone had hired me to deliver furniture and I'd shown up at the wrong address. But I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there for Lena. I found her near the drink table holding a glass of water with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She was wearing a light blue dress that made her look softer than usual. Her hair was pulled back low at the nape of her neck. She looked beautiful, she always did. But her eyes were wrong. They were bright, polite, perfect, and completely empty. The second she saw me, her shoulders dropped just a little. "You actually came," she said when I reached her. I said I would. She gave me a small smile. "You always do." "Always do what?" She looked down at her glass. "Show up." Before I could answer, a voice came from behind her. "Lena, aren't you going to introduce me?" Grant Holloway stepped forward. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a perfectly fitted gray suit and a silver watch that caught the light every time he moved. His smile was polished, practiced, the kind of smile that had been trained for boardrooms and country clubs. He looked at Lena first, then at me, like he was already assessing whether I was a problem. "Grant, this is Caleb Morgan," Lena said. Her voice was a little stiff. "My best friend." Grant extended his hand. The handshake was firm, too firm, like he wanted me to feel the pressure. "Caleb," he said, still smiling. "I've heard your name quite a bit. Hopefully good things. Mostly that you're always around." The words sounded like a compliment. His eyes said something else entirely. Lena jumped in quickly. "Caleb is very important to me." Grant glanced at her, still smiling. "I'm sure he is. Everyone needs a loyal friend." The way he said friend made it sound like a cage he was locking me inside. I didn't respond. I was too busy reminding myself why I had come here, to support Lena, not to start a fight. A few minutes later, Elaine Whitmore appeared beside me. She was wearing a cream-colored dress, her hair neatly pinned up, holding a glass of iced tea. She looked at me with that familiar, gentle smile that never quite reached her eyes in the way most people thought it did. "Caleb," she said warmly, "I'm so glad you made it." "Mrs. Whitmore." She studied me for a moment, then looked toward Lena, who was now standing next to Grant while he spoke with a small group of guests. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back. Not quite possessive, just enough to send a message. Elaine turned back to me. "Did she ask you to come?" "Yes, ma'am. She said it was a family gathering." Elaine gave a soft, knowing laugh. My daughter has always been very careful with her words when she doesn't want to tell the truth. I didn't know how to respond to that. She placed her glass on the table and looked at me directly. "So you're the reason she hasn't dated anyone?" The words hit me like a slow punch to the chest. I stared at her. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "You heard me." My mind went blank for a second. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses all seemed to fade into the background. "I don't think that's true," I managed. Elaine tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Is it not true because you don't know? Or because you don't want to know?" I couldn't answer. She continued, her voice calm and steady, like we were simply discussing the weather. "Lena has turned down 4 different men in the last 2 years. Doctors, lawyers, business partners of her father's. Every time I asked why, she said they weren't right. But I know my daughter. She wasn't looking for someone right. She was comparing all of them to someone else." My heart started pounding. "Lena and I are just best friends," I said. The words felt thin even as they left my mouth. Elaine's smile didn't change. "That's what people say when they're terrified of losing each other." I stood there, unable to speak, because the sentence didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like someone had just handed me a key to a door I had kept locked for 7 years. Elaine glanced across the yard toward her husband, who was deep in conversation with several guests. "Tonight, her father wants clarity," she said quietly. "Grant wants clarity, but Lena..." She looked back at me. "Lena has never wanted this." I swallowed hard. "She doesn't want to marry him?" Elaine gave me a long look, the kind that made me feel like a child who had just realized something too late. "She never has." I looked over at Lena again. She was standing beside Grant, smiling at something someone said. But I knew that smile. It was the same one she used with difficult clients at the hotel. The one she wore when everything inside her was falling apart, but she still had to keep the event running smoothly. Her hands were wrapped tightly around her glass. She wasn't laughing with her eyes, and every few seconds her gaze drifted toward me when she thought no one was watching. 7 years of memories suddenly rearranged themselves in my head. All the late-night calls, all the quick dinners after work, all the times she sat in my workshop complaining that my furniture was too serious. All the times I turned down dates without understanding why. All the times she told me, just stay the way you are, and somehow made it sound like the most important thing anyone had ever said to me. I had called all of it friendship, because calling it anything else had always felt too dangerous. But maybe that was exactly why she was standing here tonight, next to a man she didn't love. Elaine picked up her glass again and looked at me one last time. "I'm not telling you what to do, Caleb. But if you're going to stay silent, make sure it's because you truly don't love her. Don't stay silent just because you're afraid." Then she walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the party with my heart hammering against my ribs. For the first time in 7 years, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. And I had no idea what I was supposed to do about it. After my conversation with Elaine, I tried to keep myself together. I walked over to the food table and picked up a glass of water just to give my hands something to do. But my eyes kept finding Lena. She was still standing beside Grant. He had one hand resting lightly on the small of her back while he talked to a group of guests. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't even particularly intimate, but it was enough to make something sharp twist in my chest. I hated it. Not because Grant was rude. He was actually the opposite. He knew exactly when to smile, when to raise his glass, when to call Victor sir with just the right amount of respect. He complimented Elaine on the party without sounding fake. Everything about him was polished, appropriate, and perfectly calculated. He looked like the correct answer on paper. But Lena wasn't a math problem. A little while later, Victor Whitmore tapped his glass with a spoon. The conversations around the yard slowly died down. I stood at the edge of the crowd. Lena was near her father. Grant stood right beside her. Victor smiled at the guests and began speaking. Thank you all for coming tonight. Our family is very happy to welcome close friends on such a special occasion. Lena looked down at her feet. I saw her fingers tighten around her glass. Victor continued, as many of you know, Lena and Grant have been getting to know each other over the past few months. Our families have also known each other for many years. A few people started clapping lightly. Tonight isn't the official engagement, Victor said, but I hope this marks the beginning of a bright future for these two. The applause grew louder. I looked at Lena. She was still smiling, but I knew that smile. It was the same one she used when she had to deal with difficult clients at the hotel, the one she wore when everything inside her was screaming, but she still had to keep smiling for the sake of the event. Grant turned to her and said, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear, would you like to say a few words, sweetheart? Lena hesitated. Victor looked at his daughter, his expression making it very clear what he expected her to say. Lena took half a step forward. Her eyes swept across the yard and landed on me for just 1 second. Then she quickly looked away. Thank you all for coming, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took. I'm very grateful for everyone's support. That was all. No, I'm happy. No, I'm looking forward to our future. No, I love Grant. But the crowd still clapped, because sometimes people only hear what they want to hear. Grant leaned down and whispered something in Lena's ear. I couldn't make out the words, but I saw her expression harden for a brief moment. She gave a tiny nod. Then Grant reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My stomach dropped. Victor looked surprised but didn't stop him. Grant opened the box. Inside was a ring. A few people gasped. Grant turned to Lena, his voice clear and confident. Lena, I know tonight isn't the official engagement, but with both families here, I don't see any reason to wait for what's right. Lena stood frozen. Grant slowly lowered himself to one knee. The entire backyard went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Grant looked up at her and asked, Lena Whitmore, will you marry me? Lena didn't answer. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The silence stretched uncomfortably. People began whispering. Victor's face tightened. He stared at his daughter. Elaine stood on the other side of the yard. She wasn't looking at Grant, she was looking at me. Like she was asking, how long are you going to just stand there? I looked at Lena. She was still standing in front of Grant, but her eyes had turned red. She wasn't crying yet, but I could see how hard she was fighting to keep the tears back. I knew her. I knew her well enough to understand that her silence wasn't because she was overwhelmed with emotion. It was a silent cry for help she couldn't voice. Grant was still kneeling, but his smile was starting to crack. He lowered his voice, but I could still hear him clearly. Lena, don't make this awkward for everyone. That sentence was what finally made me move. I took 1 step forward, then another. I wasn't thinking anymore. My body had decided before my brain could catch up. Lena saw me coming. Her eyes widened. Victor frowned. Caleb, what are you doing? I stopped a few feet away from them. Every single person in the yard had turned to look at me. I'm sorry for interrupting, I said to Victor. Then I looked directly at Lena. But if she has to answer a question in front of everyone tonight, she should at least hear the truth first. Grant stood up slowly. His voice turned cold. I don't think this concerns you. Maybe you're right, I said, still looking at Lena. But if I stay silent any longer, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Lena stood completely still. I could see tears shining in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't hide behind the word best friend anymore. Not for one more second. The entire backyard went silent. I could hear the wind moving through the string lights above us. Everything else had stopped. I looked at Lena. Not at Victor, not at Grant, not at the crowd, only at her. Lena, I said, my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. I've been telling myself for years that we were just best friends. The words came out quieter than I expected, but clear enough for everyone to hear. I said it to other people. I said it to you. And I said it to myself because I was terrified that if I admitted I wanted more, I would lose you. Lena's hand flew up to cover her mouth. Grant stared at me like I had just ruined $1 million deal. Victor's voice was ice cold. Caleb, this is not the time. Elaine turned to her husband. Her voice was calm but firm. Victor, let him speak. Victor looked at his wife. Elaine didn't back down. For the first time tonight, she said, someone is saying what my daughter actually needs to hear. Victor fell silent. I took a slow breath and continued, still looking only at Lena. I didn't plan to say this here. I didn't want to turn your night into a scene. But watching you stand there, being asked to say yes to a future you never chose, I realized that if I stay silent any longer, I'm not your best friend anymore. Lena's eyes filled with tears. This time, she couldn't stop them. I took one more step closer, keeping just enough distance between us. I don't even know exactly when I fell in love with you, I said. My voice cracked slightly. Maybe there was never one single moment. Maybe it was buried in all the small things I kept calling habits. I looked at her, feeling everything I had buried for 7 years rising to the surface. It was in the way you used to come to my workshop just to complain that my furniture was too serious. It was in the late-night calls after you had a terrible day. It was in how you always seemed to know what I was thinking before I said it. It was in how I kept turning down every date, telling myself I just hadn't met the right person yet. Lena was crying openly now. Caleb, she whispered. I had already met the right person, I said. A long time ago. I was just too scared to call her by that name. Grant let out a short, bitter laugh. Very touching, he said. But this isn't a romance movie. Lena needs someone who can give her a stable future. I turned to him. A stable future isn't forcing a woman to smile while she's dying inside. Grant's face went pale. Victor stepped forward. You have no right to judge my family. I'm not judging your family, sir, I said, keeping my voice respectful. But I know Lena, and right now she's not happy. Victor stared at me. And you think you can make her happy? I can't promise I'll make her happy every single day, I answered honestly. No one can promise that without lying. I turned back to Lena. But I can promise I'll never ask her to live a life that only makes sense to other people. Elaine looked at her daughter. Lena, she said gently, do you have anything you want to say? Every pair of eyes turned to her. Lena looked at her father first, then at Grant. Finally, she looked at me. She slowly placed her glass of water on the table beside her, like she was setting down a role she had been forced to play for too long. I'm sorry, she said to Grant. Her voice was quiet but clear, but I can't accept that ring. Grant stood completely still. Lena continued, stronger this time. I don't love you. I don't want this marriage. The crowd began whispering. Victor closed his eyes. Grant's jaw tightened. Because of him? Lena looked at me for a long moment. Then she turned back to Grant and said, no, because of me. Those words seemed to freeze the entire yard. Lena took a shaky breath. Caleb gave me the courage to finally say what I've known all along. But this decision is mine. I don't want this. Grant snapped the ring box shut. He looked at Victor, then at Lena. You're making a very big mistake, he said coldly. Maybe, Lena replied, but at least it's my mistake. Grant didn't say anything else. He turned and walked out of the yard without looking back. A few guests avoided eye contact. Others looked at Lena like they were seeing her for the first time. Victor stood frozen for a long time. Finally, he looked at his daughter and asked quietly, "Are you sure?" Lena met his eyes. "I'm sure." Victor turned to me. I couldn't read his expression, but before he could speak, Elaine stepped forward and pulled Lena into her arms. "I know," she whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Lena broke down completely, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. I stood there, afraid to move. This moment belonged to her, not to me. But then Lena lifted her head and looked at me through her tears. She reached out her hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it out. I walked toward her. I took her hand. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't holding her hand like a best friend. I was holding it like a man who had finally chosen her in front of the entire world she came from. After that night, nothing became easy overnight. The Whitmore family had to deal with a storm of gossip. Grant left angry. Victor lost a major contract with Grant's father. Some relatives called Lena impulsive. Others said I had ruined a perfectly good match. But Lena never apologized for saying no. She only apologized to her mother for letting things drag on until they exploded in the middle of the party. Elaine had simply taken her daughter's hands and said, "You didn't ruin the party, sweetheart. You just stopped ruining your own life." Lena held on to those words for a long time. Victor needed more time. He was a man who measured everything in returns and risks, and I had just become the biggest risk he had ever taken with his only daughter. But he never asked Lena to take back her decision. That alone told me more about him than anything else. Lena and I started dating after that. It sounds strange to say started, because we had already been in each other's lives for 7 years. But this was different. We moved slowly on purpose. No rushed engagement, no grand declarations to prove anything to anyone. We just let it grow from the friendship we had spent years building. She still teased me when I got too serious. I still drove her around to pick out event decorations, even though I didn't understand why candles needed mood. She still came to the workshop, sat on unfinished tables, and told me the smell of sawdust made her feel calm. One evening a few months later, she was sitting on the edge of my workbench while I attached legs to a dining table. Out of nowhere, she said, "I waited a long time for you to figure it out." I set the drill down. "Were you mad at me?" She thought about it. "Sometimes." I nodded. "I deserved that." Lena looked at me for a long moment. But I was scared too. I was afraid if I said something first, you would choose the safe version of us. And I didn't want to be the person who ruined the only thing I was sure about. I walked over and stood between her knees. I was just as scared. She gave a small, sad smile. "We're idiots." "Yeah," I said. "Complete idiots." She laughed softly. Then I took her hands. "But I don't want to be an idiot anymore," I told her. Lena's eyes softened. "Then don't let go." "I won't." A year later, Victor invited me to dinner. Not as Lena's best friend, not as an unexpected guest, but as the man who was dating his daughter. The meal was still a little tense, but it wasn't cold anymore. He asked about my work, told him about the custom tables I was building for a new restaurant. Elaine sat beside Lena, occasionally glancing at us with the quiet smile of someone who had known the ending long before the rest of us. After dinner, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and handed me a slice of lemon cake. "I told you," she said. "Told me what?" "That you were the reason she stopped dating anyone else." I looked through the doorway at Lena, laughing at something her father said. Her hair was down, her face calmer than it had been the night of the party. "I wish I had figured it out sooner," I said. Elaine's voice was gentle. "What matters is that you figured it out before it was too late." 2 years after the party, I asked Lena to marry me inside my workshop. No big dinner, no families watching, no pressure. Just the two of us, the smell of pine, late afternoon light coming through the windows, and the first table I had ever built specifically for the house we would one day share. I placed the ring on the wooden surface between us. Lena stared at it, then at me. "Caleb," she said carefully, "what are you doing?" I looked at her. "This time I'm asking when no one is forcing you to answer." Her eyes filled immediately. "I watched you almost take someone else's ring because I was too scared to speak," I said. "I don't want to make that mistake again. Not for one more day." I took her hands. "Will you marry me? Not because our families want it. Not because it makes sense on paper, not because we've known each other forever, but because you choose me and I choose you, Lena cried. But she was smiling through the tears. Yes, she whispered, I choose you. Then she wiped her eyes and added, but if you wait another 7 years to ask me anything important again, I'm making a wooden ring and proposing to you first. I laughed. I believe you would. She smiled. Of course, I learned from the best woodworker I know. I kissed her, and for the first time in our entire story, there was no one arranging things. No one applying pressure. No one standing between us with a future already calculated and approved. Just two people who had finally found the courage to name what had been right in front of them for 7 years. Our story didn't begin with a perfect confession. It began with a mother who saw too clearly, a party built like a marriage announcement, a ring Lena never wanted, and a man who finally understood that sometimes silence isn't protection. Sometimes it's betrayal. That night at the party, I stood up. Not to steal her from anyone, but to give her back the right to choose and how and by some miracle she chose me.